Hello, I'm Dr. Adam Weiss, and this is another PowerPoint lecture video for our class, Curriculum and the Young Child. It's also very relevant for any teachers of early childhood students or elementary age students. Today's topic will be a continuation of our discussion on developmentally appropriate education, and we are going to focus specifically on how we can implement and apply developmentally appropriate instruction in our classrooms. So first of all, it's important to realize that developmentally appropriate instruction recognizes that children develop holistically. So keeping to this in mind, developmentally appropriate instruction focuses on the idea that we should teach to the whole child. So when we're designing our instructional lessons, we're not just teaching one content area or one specific topic, but we're connecting several different content areas or several different aspects of learning into our lessons. For example, we need to teach to the whole child and develop these 6 areas of children's academic and cognitive development. First of all, as teachers, we need to focus on supporting our students' aesthetic appreciation and cognitive ability. So aesthetic abilities is basically the ability for someone to recognize natural beauty, to recognize, to be artistic, to recognize different colors, and to understand things visually. That would be aesthetic qualities that you could implement in your classrooms. Moreover, within your lessons, you should also develop students' affective abilities. So by affective, this is spelled with an A, and we are talking about how we can develop students' emotional learning and understanding. So how do they understand their own emotions? How do they interpret their emotions of other people? And how to correspond or react when certain emotions arise. Furthermore, effective early childhood instruction that's developmentally appropriate also discusses cognitive development of students. So when we develop students' cognitive abilities, we're teaching students how to make conclusions, how to analyze or compare and contrast, or see the relationship between 2 different pieces of information, how to organize information, and also how to evaluate the relative importance of information, which is more important, to develop an opinion as well, and to justify that opinion with evidence. Furthermore, teaching to the whole child also develops students' language abilities. So this is developing students' oral language abilities, their ability to listen and to speak, and to elaborate with description, but also their language abilities and their written expressions. So being able to describe themselves, write in complete sentences, write accurately, and to write in different genres. Furthermore, developmentally appropriate instruction also emphasizes students' physical development. So it develops students' hand-eye coordination, their body coordination, and applies to students' kinesthetic learning. Next, developmentally appropriate instruction also includes an aspect of learning that supports students' social development. So students learn how to interact appropriately with other people, how to communicate, and how to collaborate for a mutual purpose. So as a teacher, you want to provide instruction that meets each of these 6 elements. This would be teaching to the whole child. So you're not just teaching a math lesson, or you're not just teaching a science lesson, but rather you're finding ways to incorporate all 6 aspects into your teaching of that math lesson or science lesson. And that way you're teaching to the whole child. You're helping the child develop holistically. Next, it's important to realize that developmentally appropriate instruction understands and recognizes how children develop. So children go through specific stages of maturation, and we're going to go into them in more detail later in our course. But it's important to realize that students go through a set stage of development, but students also proceed through those stages at different paces. So some students might be really advanced, let's say in their cognitive development. Maybe they're very good at drawing conclusions or finding patterns. Yet, some students might be below most of their classmates in their emotional maturity. So they might be needed additional support and be attached to either their caregiver or their teacher. So students progress through the different stages at different times, and as an educator, we need to be patient and consider what level students are in terms of their physical and mental development, and we can support those students, differentiate our instruction to meet those students' unique needs so that they proceed through the different developmental stages. Another thing that we have to understand with developmentally appropriate instruction is that developmentally appropriate instruction focuses on ensuring that the classroom environment is safe and supportive. So research shows that children learn best when they feel secure. And this is both physically secure, so free from physical or bodily harm, but also emotionally secure. So they feel supported by their classmates. They feel like their teacher cares about them and wants to get to know students on an individual level and get to know their individual interests and goals. Furthermore, children also benefit from having routines and predictable learning environments. That predictable learning environment helps allow children to focus more on the instruction and less on worrying about what will happen next, what could cause a distraction. So students would hopefully not have to worry about those distractions or those uncertainties. Furthermore, children also need to feel like they are in a risk-free environment where they're free to take academic risks and try out new concepts. And if they make a mistake or they fail, then they feel that they will be okay, that they'll move on, they'll ask for help from their teacher and from their peers, and they'll get that help from their teacher and their peers, and eventually children will be successful. So if students feel like they are in a risk-free environment, they're more likely to try out new tasks, and they're also more likely to persevere when tasks get difficult. Another thing we have to understand when we teach through developmentally appropriate instruction is the best practices in teaching young children. So research shows us that young children learn best through active learning. So students are the ones that are either physically demonstrating what they've learned, acting it out, or they're the ones having the discussions. They're the ones participating. They're listening to their peers and saying their own points of view. Or it's the actual students who are practicing the concepts. So young children should be involved with active learning where it's student-focused. It's less teacher-focused. The teacher is doing less of the talking, less of the actual modeling. Yes, the teacher will model initially, but after the initial model, quickly the teacher should start to have students start to practice with the teacher and then on their own. Because students learn primarily through personal experience, especially young children. Young children also benefit from social interaction and self-reflection. So this self-reflection could be a reflection over what they learned during that class period or during that lesson, or also how they could improve and grow as learners, what they might do differently in future lessons or in future practice opportunities. Another thing that's important to realize is that developmentally appropriate instruction emphasizes the idea that we should motivate children through continuous challenge and mastery. So students should feel like they are challenged by their content that they're learning in their classroom. They should feel like it's something new, it's something exciting and interesting, and that there's meaning to completing that task. So they see the relevance of why it would be important to learn this information, how it relates to the real world. Moreover, it should be challenging in the sense that the new information you teach to students should be slightly above their current ability level. If you just stay at their current ability level, it's kind of like having students stay in a stagnant situation where they're not really progressing. Also, students have already seen that information, so it could be boring for them. It's too easy. So if you challenge students with content that's slightly above their grade level, while also providing students with scaffolds, and we're going to go into scaffolds in a lot more detail in a little bit, but providing students with those scaffolds or those supports, then students will be not only successful in completing that task, and they'll feel like they accomplished something because it was slightly above their current ability level. It was something new they learned and something new that they, a new skill they now possess. And also, students will feel a sense of increased self-esteem because they were successful. Another thing to remember is that developmentally appropriate instruction differentiates to students different learning styles. So there's various different learning styles, but many, the consensus and much of academic research is based off of Gardner's 8 learning styles. And you can see them here in this chart. But basically, children have different intelligences. They all have elements of each one, but some children have certain learning preferences or certain intelligences that are more predominant in those students, that are more likely to be students' preferences for their learning. So, for example, you might have some students that, yes, they have all of these skills, but they're especially good at spatial learning. So they're good at mapping things out in their mind or on paper. They have a lot of geometric reasoning. You might have students that have more of a naturalist intelligence, where they really appreciate nature and natural beauty, and they're very artistic. Furthermore, you might have students that have intrapersonal learning intelligence, where they know a lot about themselves as people, how they're feeling, what their strengths are, what are their areas they can grow, and what are their goals. You might have students that have a strong musical intelligence, where they're very good with rhythms and sound, and they're able to reproduce music and reflect on music. You might also have students that have linguistic learning intelligence. That's more of their predominant intelligence. So students might be primarily preferring to learn either through listening to other people speak to them, or through speaking themselves, either communicating orally or in written form. You might also have students that have bodily kinesthetic intelligence as their dominant intelligence. And these students learn best through acting out what they're doing, and they're very skilled with their hand-eye coordination and their body coordination. They have a lot of strength in coordinating how they move. Moreover, you might have students that have interpersonal intelligence. They're really good at understanding people and understanding their emotions and their feelings, and understanding how to communicate best with people and how to motivate other people. Finally, you might have students that are dominant in the area of logical reasoning, where they have very strong abilities to make conclusions and to reason, and to think about the relationship between different pieces of information. And students are also strong at detecting patterns and justifying their point of view with evidence. That would be logical reasoning. So you are likely to have students of all of these different intelligences. So as much as possible, try to include different instructional activities that cater to each of these different learning styles or intelligences. Another thing that we need to remember is that developmentally appropriate instruction focuses on the idea that children learn best through play. So children learn through academic or intellectual play because in these experiences, students have opportunities to act out or to imitate the real world. They also have opportunities to interact with other people when they're playing, discuss the game or discuss the learning activity with their peers. and also negotiate how to collaborate together to complete the activity. Students develop physical skills in terms of hand-eye coordination and body coordination. Also, playing with a purpose, so playing in an academic sense, like having a learning center, or playing a learning game, or maybe doing a role play of the story they read, or do a reader's theater, or maybe have a play activity where they do a science experiment and then reflect on that science experiment. All of these activities that are exciting for students and low stress and low risk help to alleviate and kind of decrease stress in students. It helps them not only feel motivated to complete the activity and to enjoy and to see how learning can be fun, but also it's just decreasing the amount of stress they might have. Furthermore, when students have the opportunity to play and to use their imagination, it helps develop their creativity and their creative skills. Furthermore, developmentally appropriate instruction also focuses on relevant, meaningful content. So the types of information that teachers are teaching to their students is meaningful, not only because it follows the state standards, but also it's meaningful because students can see the importance to the real world and how they could apply this knowledge in the future. Furthermore, developmentally appropriate instruction works to link students' home lives, their interests, their passions, and their prior learning experiences to what the content is being taught in the classroom. And one way teachers can do this is to survey students. They can ask them, what are the things you like to do in your free time? Like, what are your hobbies? Tell me about your family. What are some traditions? What languages do you speak at home? What kind of responsibilities do you have as in your family? What are some important or enjoyable times that you really appreciate that you do with your family? Now we're going to get into some specific developmentally appropriate teaching strategies. And it's important to remember that these strategies are beneficial, and they're all good. Just as a teacher, you need to think about which of these specific strategies would apply to the type of activity that you are teaching at that moment. So while all of these are good, some are more relevant than others in particular situations. So our first strategy would be sensory engagement. So sensory engagement is a way where the teacher helps to engage students' 5 senses. And this is a way for them to explore and experience firsthand new information. So students, the teacher finds ways for students to listen. I know it says listing on the PowerPoint, but that should be listening. They have opportunities to listen, to see things, to touch things, to taste things, and to smell things. Of course, the teacher has to make sure that this is in a safe environment and that the things that, for example, they're tasting and smelling is safe and edible and okay for their health. But when students do use all 5 senses to explore content, they're much more likely to remember it. Also, because it's a hands-on learning experience, students develop first-hand knowledge, which once again is very important for young children. That's how they learn best. So one way to do this is to incorporate real objects in your classroom that, of course, are safe. Having demonstrations where students are involved in the demonstration. And then having students interact with, let's say, guest speakers. So guest speakers can come in and students can discuss with them and learn from those guest speakers' experiences. Another strategy is environmental cues. So environmental cues are basically visuals that are nonverbal that communicate to students what are the expectations. One of the great ways to do this is to provide anchor charts for students. Anchor charts are basically kind of like a reminder chart that this teacher develops with students, and they teach it to students. And once students are aware of that anchor chart, they can go back and look at it if they ever are working independently and forget something. So teachers might make anchor charts on how to write a complete sentence, or how to unpack their items and get ready for the school day, or an anchor chart on the different class rules, or how to utilize technology. A third strategy is task analysis. So task analysis is basically just breaking down a more complex task into individual steps. So there's different parts to it. So the chaining could be where you break it down into individual steps, and students only work on one step at a time and master it, so that it's not, and once they master it, they move on to another step. So if you break it down into individual steps, it makes it much more manageable for students. Another part of task analysis could also be successive approximation. So once students finally get those individual steps, they start completing the task, and they'll complete it first at a very basic level. It's their first attempt, their first try. So they might make errors. It might not be that neat or clean or accurate. However, you can say to the students, great job, this is a wonderful first draft or first try. Now, let's keep on practicing and refine this activity, and we'll make a finished product that eventually is much more accurate and exact. A fourth strategy could be scaffolding. So scaffolding is basically providing the support that students need to be successful on a task that's slightly above their ability level. And there's different forms of scaffolding, but the scaffolding that we're going to talk about today is primarily the type of additional support that teachers will provide to students. Either it could be teachers providing it, or other more knowledgeable individuals like maybe parents or family members, or even classmates that maybe are at a higher ability or a higher current level than students right now, an higher academic level than students' current level. So basically, scaffolding, what you'll do is you'll provide plenty of scaffolds in the beginning, but eventually you're going to gradually remove those scaffolds until students can start to do things on their own. And then eventually all of the scaffolds are removed and students are doing things all on their own independently with accuracy. So normally scaffolding follows in the following order. I do, you watch. So the teacher does and models the activity, the action, the skill, or provides the knowledge to students, and students watch and listen and observe. Next, we have the I do, you help stage. So as you can see in the first stage, I do, you watch, the teacher is doing all of the instruction. So it's all of the control is focused on the teacher. It's teacher-centered. However, in the second stage, I do, you help, in this stage, the teacher is still demonstrating, but they're calling on students to help answer questions or come up and help model or help provide feedback to the teacher on how to complete the activity. And so the I do, you help is starting to gradually give students a little bit more responsibility. It's still primarily teacher-focused, teacher-centered, but students are starting to have more input and role in the learning. Next is the you do, I help. So this becomes much more student-focused, but there's still some teacher focus as well, because the teacher is there to help students practice. So students are starting to practice on their own. The teacher comes by and supports them, gives them pointers, and then helps them if they get stuck. Also, students might also be working collaboratively with their peers, and so this is a great time for them to practice and conduct guided practice with their peers for support and scaffolds. Finally, it becomes totally student-centered and student-focused in the last stage, which is you do, I watch. In this stage, the student is doing the activity independently. They're practicing on their own, and the teacher is just there observing them, giving them feedback after they complete the task, and helping them refine and improve. But overall, students are the main ones in demonstrating their learning in this stage. Another strategy could be guided practice and repetition. So in the guided practice and repetition strategy, students are obviously practicing several times, but there's different stages. So you could have rehearsals where students do repeated practice that's very similar, and it becomes almost automatic, the task. Another way to practice could be variations, where students do similar skills or use the same skill, but they have multiple representations. They use it in different contexts. So maybe, let's say addition. Maybe they learn how to add one-digit numbers, and they know how to add them just by computation on a piece of paper. They know how to add them with objects. They know how to add them using word problems, or when a story is read to them out loud, or a question posed to them orally. So students are seeing how to use that context, that lesson, that skill, addition, in various situations. A third way that could involve guided practice and repetition involves elaboration. So students are taking what they've learned and they're expanding upon it. They're doing more research. They're thinking about new ways they could apply their learning, how this learning could be used in their future lives. A sixth strategy involves invitations, and this is pretty straightforward. This is basically inviting students or suggesting to students how they could practice or how they could learn. So inviting them to join their classmate in an activity in a learning center, or inviting them to read a book after they finished a task. A seventh strategy would be behavior reflections, and this is reflections that the teacher is making. So behavior reflections would be while the students are completing a task, the teacher is basically orally summarizing what students are doing. They're saying out loud what they see the students doing, and they say it in a non-judgmental, just matter-of-fact way. Like, oh, I see that you are organizing the shapes based on geometric shapes. So you're putting all of the circular objects together. You're putting all the rectangular objects together, and you're putting all the triangular objects together. That's great. And so when you are, as a teacher, providing this behavior reflection, that helps to kind of show students the importance of what they're doing. It kind of helps them realize, hey, there is a meaning to what I'm doing or this activity. And it also develops their vocabulary skills, because you're modeling academic vocabulary as you're providing that behavior reflection. An eighth strategy that's similar to behavior reflections would be paraphrase reflections. And that would be when the student says something, and then the teacher paraphrases what the student said in different words, using academic language, content language, and using complete sentences that are elaborate and descriptive. So this is great for students because it's modeling for students how to speak in complete sentences, how to use those academic and content vocabulary, how to be descriptive in your phrasing, and it also shows that the teacher cares about what the student says. It gives the student the opportunity to finally, after the teacher paraphrases what the student says, the teacher asks the student, did I understand what you said correctly, or do you agree with how I summarized what you said, or is that what you were saying? So it shows that the teacher not only cares enough to restate and emphasize what the student said, but also the teacher cares enough to ask the student to make sure that they were correct in their understanding of what the student said. A ninth strategy would involve modeling and demonstrations. And we've talked about this already, but the modeling is very important because it shows the ideal situation, and students can imitate the desired behaviors based off the modeling or demonstration. The 10th strategy would be effective praise. So effective praise would be when you you give praise to individual students, and it's specific, and it focuses on how students put in a significant amount of effort and how their effort contributed to their success. And also, it's really important to note that effective praise should be given to each student. You might not have to be at each, instantly. You might give it to one student, then move on and give another effective praise that's different to another student. but it needs to be sincere and honest and genuine, so students can tell if you're being fake, and they will not appreciate that. But it also needs to be provided to each student, because that way students don't develop some competition between each other, or they develop different levels of self-esteem. If you give praise to each student that's effective, all students' self-esteem will grow. Another thing to remember is that you want to provide effective praise in a way that's non-intrusive. You don't want to interrupt the student's learning or cause a distraction by making the praise so unusual or so magnificent or so extreme that it distracts other students from what they're doing. So now let's talk about the 11th strategy. The strategy 11 involves telling, explaining, and informing. And this is something that probably you've just naturally have seen as a learner, and also maybe in your other educational classes. But basically, this is just finding a way to present the information in a meaningful way. Not just having students remember or recite facts, but having a meaningful interaction where students and the teacher are talking and discussing the content. Students are seeing real-world examples, real-world models, and experiencing the learning firsthand. They're also, the teachers providing any necessary information for students, but also allowing students to try out the information on their own and to elaborate on the process. A 12th strategy would be a do-it signal. And that's basically just providing a polite command that involves academics. Like, how about you try solving this problem in a different way? Or, please summarize what you read in the story. Or, please tell me everything you remember about this topic in science. Strategy 13 involves making challenges. And we've already talked about the importance of challenging students and teaching slightly above their grade level. Well, one way you can also do this is by challenging students by posing a task based on a challenge. Like, let's see how many books you can read this week. Let's see how many descriptive words you can use to describe this character. Or let's see how many shapes you can draw. And remember, it's important that you're making it a challenge, but you don't want to make it competitive. Because then students are more worried about competition, and if they aren't successful then as their partner, then they feel less than their partner, or they have a lower self-esteem. So you don't want to make it competitive. You can make group challenges, or even individual challenges, but you don't want to emphasize who did the most or who did the best. You want to praise all students for the effort they gave and their different successes. The 14th strategy is questioning, and I think you've probably had plenty of exposure to this as a student and also in your ed classes. But basically, you should pose a variety of questions to students. They shouldn't just be simple, one-word, straightforward answers, like, who was the first president of the United States? Yes, that's an important question to ask students, but those should not be all the types of questions you have. In fact, most of your questions should not be closed like that question where there was just one correct answer. Instead, most questions should be open-ended, where there's various answers. And students have to justify which answer they picked based on evidence or reasoning to support their thoughts. So, why was George Washington's presidency so important for the United States? Or how could we apply addition in our daily lives? Or why is it important that animals have why is it important that animals have a clean habitat? And so you want to have a variety of both closed questions and open-ended questions. The last strategy is silence. And in this strategy, it's pretty straightforward. It's you observing students. You're letting your presence be known, so students know you're watching them and they know that they need to be on task. and but they also know that they're safe, right? That nothing crazy is going to happen if, let's say, they're doing an experiment or they're doing a learning center or they're trying out a new task. They know that you're there watching them, and so you can help them if needed, but you're silently just observing them. And this way, you can observe how students solve problems or support themselves if they face trouble or they struggle with their learning. And you also cause students to think for themselves. If you're being silent while they're completing a task, students are having to kind of solve the problem on their own and think for themselves, not just you telling them what to do. And this is important also after you pose a question. When you pose questions, you want to make sure you give students wait time. So you want to give them about 8 to 10 seconds after you ask a question before you call on students to answer. And this is important because this makes sure that all students are having time to think about their answer, and all students are holding themselves accountable because they know, hey, the teacher's not just going to quickly pick on somebody. They could pick to answer the question. They could pick me to answer the question. So I better think of my own answer. Also, it's just allowing them more time to think more comprehensively over their answer, not just think of the immediate answer, but think about why that could be the answer. This is another thing that's important, is the cycle of learning. So when you're providing developmentally appropriate instruction, it's important that you understand that students progress through different cycles of learning. And you want to support students as they progress through each cycle. In fact, you want to teach your lessons with this in mind, where you're going through these cycles of learning. So the first stage of learning, or the first stage of the cycle of learning, is awareness. So this is where students start to realize or understand. They start to see, oh, this is the new concept I'm about to learn. So, oh, this is called subtraction, or this is this type of animal, or this is what we're going to talk about today. So they just become aware of what's going to be kind of like the learning goal. Next, students go through exploration. They explore the concept on their own. They try out how to solve the problem, or they try out how to think of their own conclusion or their own answer. They do their own investigations. They discuss the concepts with their partners and peers. They come up with their own initial explanations or conclusions or ideas about something. Next is the acquisition phase. So once students have their own thoughts about the topic, you, the teacher, are going to provide students with the specific rules of the task or the specific facts relevant to the task, and then show them modeling of the activity. And then students are going to take what they've learned now of the realities of the task, and they're going to start to practice on their own, which is the fourth step. So students start to practice the concept, and they practice it in various ways and in different situations. And then finally, once students have developed that skill and it's become pretty automatic and they feel like they've mastered that topic, then they're going to expand upon their learning through the last stage, which is generalization. So generalization would be when students take what they've learned and then they think about how they could apply it in a different situation. So maybe they know how to tell the theme of a story. So now they're going to find the theme of their favorite book they read every night at home. Or maybe they're going to find a theme of a movie they watch over the weekend. Or they're going to write their own story that's based on a specific theme. So it's important that while students are progressing through each cycle of learning, or each stage of the cycle of learning, or each phase of the cycle of learning, that you're encouraging students. You're providing students with support. You're giving them feedback. If they're getting stuck, you're asking them guided questions or giving them specific information to help them get through the cycle of learning. You're providing various different opportunities to practice. You're encouraging students, and you're modeling to students how to generalize the information, how to think about applications to the real world or future applications, or how they can take what they've learned and expand upon it. And then also, you're connecting to what the cycle of learning to students' interests. showing that what you're doing in the classroom is important to their lives. We kind of already talked about this already, but we're going to close with this theory, and it's the theory of zone of proximal development. So basically, and I'm going to show a picture of it, the zone of proximal development is slightly beyond students' current ability level. This is the actual difficulty level that you should introduce new content to students. So if you stay at students' current ability level, they're going to remain stagnant. They're not going to progress. But if you introduce new content at a slightly above their current level, that's going to challenge students, and that's going to get them excited to learn and teach them something that's new and that can develop their abilities. However, at first, students might struggle. So the whole point is that if you're going to teach content at slightly above students' ability level, you need to provide support as well. So you need to provide maybe teacher support, where the teacher is helping them or doing modeling or helping or doing the activity with students or asking guided questions. Or maybe they have the scaffolds of having their peers help them working in group learning. Or maybe they're having technology scaffolds. Maybe the computer's reading the story to them, or the computer's asking them guided questions or suggesting or modeling or showing videos on how to complete the task. Or maybe they're having other scaffolds like embedded definitions, where within the story there are definitions of new vocabulary words. So there's different types of scaffolds, but the main thing with the zone of proximal development, it is basically the ability level. It's kind of like the just right place that you should teach your lesson. It's slightly above students' grade level, but it's not way too advanced for them that they could not be successful. You want them to be able to be successful in completing this new task that's slightly more challenging, but the way you'll ensure that they'll be successful is that they can have some help from you and from their peers, and they will be able to eventually accomplish the task on their own. So if it's too easy, they remain stagnant, it's boring to them, they're not progressing. But if it's too difficult, it's overwhelming and frustrating. So if it's slightly above their ability level, but you are providing them with supports and scaffolds, students will be successful, they'll improve their self-esteem, and their knowledge will grow. Thank you very much. I hope you will come and enjoy some of my other videos. Have a great day.